This Week in Gaming with Naomi Kyle.
Hello everyone, I'm Naomi Kyle and welcome back to This Week in Gaming. This week we're catching up on the value of AI in RPGs, Keanu Reeves' latest video game endeavor, a popular animated TV show gets a video game, and news of emulators and the App Store. We've got all of this week's gaming news, so let's get started. The gaming industry has been slammed with layoffs from publishers and developers of all sizes, so what's one more? It was announced last week that GTA publisher Take-Two Interactive is laying off 5% of its workforce, which may not sound like much at first, but Take-Two is a giant studio, and the layoff is said to result in upwards of 500 people losing their jobs. This layoff comes after Take-Two's CEO Strauss Zelnick said that they had no plans for layoffs to take place during the company's cost reduction program that they announced back in February of this year. Some of our listeners may remember a story about Take-Two from episode 8 of the podcast when I reported that Take-Two had acquired the Borderlands developers Gearbox Entertainment for a whopping $460 million. If Take-Two really has implemented a cost reduction program, maybe they should have thought twice before dropping $500 million on a new studio. Or maybe Michael Dowse at Larian Studios is right. Layoffs are 100% avoidable, and none of these companies are at risk of going bankrupt. And these layoffs are only happening now because large gaming companies have wanted to for a while now, and now that everyone else is doing it, that makes it okay. It's getting tiresome having to report on these massive layoffs week after week, and I'm really hoping we're nearing the end of such news dominating our industry. Game emulators have been under fire lately since Nintendo filed a lawsuit against the Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu, which has since discontinued all operations in fear of more legal retaliation from Nintendo. So it might sound crazy to hear that there is a new Nintendo emulator making waves. And what is even crazier is that the emulator can be used on iOS devices like iPhones and iPads. And just a few weeks ago, the App Store opened up the gates to game emulators, allowing them to be listed in the App Store. Emulators, for those who don't know, are programs that simulate the software of a video game console, so it can play ROMs, or in other words, games. Most simply put, the whole thing works like this. You have a ROM of Tetris on your phone. Tetris says to your phone, "I need a Game Boy to run." Your phone then uses the emulator like a mask and says, "Oh, hi Tetris, I'm a Game Boy." Tetris then gives you the thumbs up and you're rotating colorful blocks in no time. The emulator currently taking the internet by storm is called Delta. Delta allows users to emulate a wide variety of Nintendo consoles, like the NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and Nintendo DS. Users just load ROMs from the internet and the emulator does the rest. It is important to note that emulating a game that you don't already own is piracy, and we would never encourage anyone to pirate video games. Just a heads up. As we spoke about last week, the Fallout TV series aired on Amazon's streaming network Prime Video on April 10th. The streaming service dropped all 8 episodes for maximum bingeability, and fans of the Fallout franchise and gamers alike have gobbled it up. Since its release, the show has received overwhelming praise for its narrative and unique expression of the Fallout universe. Given the show's massive success, Amazon has officially announced that they will be renewing the show for a second season, only a week after its premiere. It is amazing what can be accomplished with good writers and respect for the source material. I am so glad to see that this series has grown into such a success, and I can't wait to see what the Fallout TV show has in store for us next. Just don't keep us waiting too long. The wasteland needs us. The topic of AI has been dominating the airwaves as of late, and a recent article on Aftermath has shed some light on how game developers feel about the new technology. Pal Sasko is a quest designer for developer CD Projekt Red, the makers of the Witcher video games and Cyberpunk 2077. CD Projekt Red has been experimenting with generative AI for NPCs, and while various gaming companies explore the potential of AI-powered characters, Sasko emphasizes a significant gap between the tech and handcrafted ones. Yes, despite advancements in AI, Sasko remains skeptical about the ability of AI to match the depth and nuance of characters crafted by human writers and designers. Sasko said in a quote, "I could definitely see the ways this could be used to bring up more reactivity," adding that, when it comes to writing and voice acting, there's just a gigantic, really long way to go. I've seen a lot behind the scenes. There is a visible gap between authored content, the bespoke content that writers, quest designers, cinematic designers make with their own hands, and something that AI can provide. As AI continues to be tested in video game development, it's interesting to hear the perspective of someone on the ground floor. I believe games and all forms of entertainment should continue to embrace human creativity rather than veering away from it. But what do you think? How would you feel about interacting with an NPC whose responses are solely generated by artificial intelligence? We'll be talking about this topic more in depth here a little later on in the show. Skybound Entertainment, the publisher of the Walking Dead games, has revealed that they will be creating a AAA video game based off the comic book and Amazon TV series Invincible. Skybound made the announcement via a crowdfunding campaign asking fans to show their support by donating towards the development of the game. At the time of this episode, Skybound has raised over $500,000, far surpassing their target goal of only $50,000. As part of their pitch to get fans excited, the studio promises that the untitled Invincible game will have several expansions and support multiplayer. The project is said to also involve industry veterans from EA and Activision Blizzard. It said that the game's release will enable future releases, expansions, new character arcs, and adventures for years to come. Good on them for raising over $500,000 already. It's almost like they're invincible. Keanu Reeves is no stranger to the world of video games. Oh no. He has made guest appearances during the Game Awards and has lent his talents to the dearly beloved Cyberpunk 2077. Reeves is now merging his talents as a video game actor and movie actor by starring in the third installment of the Sonic movie franchise as none other than Shadow the Hedgehog, who is like Sonic, only darker, edgier, and unlike Sonic in every way, other than the fact that they are both anthropomorphic hedgehogs. The reveal took place at a CinemaCon presentation last week after the debut of the first footage from Sonic 3. During that presentation, it was revealed that after the events of Sonic 2, Dr. Robotnik, played by Jim Carrey, formulates a new plan to defeat Sonic by creating Shadow. My shadow just follows me around everywhere. Can't have it all, I guess. Last week, Nintendo hosted their Indie World Showcase, a preview of all the indie games, new and old, coming to the Nintendo Switch. The 22-minute video was full of unique indie titles, but since I don't have enough time to touch on each and every game, I'll just focus on my personal highlights. Little Kitty Big City finally got a release date. The feline-forward open-world RPG is coming to Nintendo Switch May 9th, 2024. Refine Self, the personality test, was announced that it would be finding itself on Nintendo Switch, and we can expect to see this unique RPG hit consoles this summer. The spiritual successor to Wario Land 4, Anton Blast, got an official release trailer, and it looks to be a timed exclusive for the Nintendo Switch. The embroidery-based Huga Puzzler Stitch was shadow dropped as a console exclusive during the Indie Showcase, solidifying the Nintendo Switch as the coziest console on the market. While there was yet again no mention of Hollow Knight's Silksong during the Indie Showcase, myself and Metroidvania fans alike are still holding out hope for a release sometime this year. Former Blizzard president Mikey Barra seriously kicked the hornet's nest last week when he posted on X, formerly Twitter, saying, "When I beat a game, there are some that leave me in awe of how amazing the experience was. At the end of the game, I've often thought, I wish I could give these folks another $10 or $20 because it was worth more than my initial $70. Many were outraged and took to the comments section with metaphoric torches and pitchforks in hand. Ibarra did, however, acknowledge that this idea might not be well received by everyone, especially considering the existing fatigue surrounding tipping culture in other industries. Ibarra's proposal comes amid a turbulent period for the gaming industry, what with rising development costs, studio closures, and layoffs abound. Perhaps not the best time for such a proposal. And that's the news this week. It's now time to chat with our guest, Kahlief Adams, who joins us again on the show to chat about using AI in video games and what that means. Hey, Kahlief, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how you doing? So happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Couple topics I want to touch on, and they're very interesting topics for me, so I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on all of these. But I want to kick it off with a subject that we touched on in last week's episode, which was, are games getting too expensive? You know, there was some backlash from some gamers, in-game items locked behind paywalls, that sort of debate. $130 for a special edition copy of a game. What do you think? Do you think they're getting too expensive?
I mean, it depends on your fandom, right? It really depends on what do you think value is in the grand scheme of the conversation. $130 is a lot for a game, especially with games going up to $70 as kind of the baseline for what they cost. But those big editions usually cost a little bit more. There's this extra stuff in those that goes into it. Usually there's a statuette, or you get some really cool swag that comes along with it, and there's an extra cost that comes along with it. So in a weird way, $130 for a special edition doesn't seem out of line for me. If that was the baseline price for games, then I could see people being really upset. But yeah, I think that price is, depending upon how much you love a series or a game, totally fine.
What about stuff locked behind paywalls?
Ooh, paywalls are hard, right? I think there's a perceived loss when it comes to putting a thing behind a paywall. A lot of folks will say, well, that stuff should have just been in the base game. All of those pieces are in there. I mean, I think with microtransactions being a part of that conversation, you wind up seeing, fans kind of being really upset about this kind of feel that they're getting gouged for their money. Again, I think my biggest advice for everyone when it comes to conversations around paywalls and microtransactions and all that kind of stuff is you don't have to buy it. You
Right.
don't have to purchase it. It is not a thing where someone is holding you down and grabbing your wallet out of your back pocket and saying you must pay this bill. So I say, use caution. Your wallet is your best guide in that respect. And you don't have to buy everything. There is a level of
That's
FOMO
right.
that goes along with all of
That's
it.
what I feel
understand.
people are most upset about is the FOMO.
Yeah, and I get that. Like, FOMO is a real thing. That fear of
missing out for those who don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Fear of missing out is definitely a thing. But you have to use some self restraint on that and be okay with maybe not getting everything in a world where you have so many options to be able to buy or not buy. So I think it's fine.
Yeah. All right. Good to talk on that a little bit since it's a hot button topic all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you just interviewed the head of Convey, that is doing specifically AI for NPCs, non-player characters in games.
Mm-hmm.
What were his or her thoughts? What did they talk about?
Yeah, so I had a demo at Game Developers Conference a couple of months ago, and one of the demos was with Convey. And Convey, they've been doing this really interesting layer of the game space where they are making NPCs AI generated. And the reason you would do that is that if you go into a scene and you go talk to a character who's there, who's an NPC, then it being driven by AI, you'll have a more robust conversation loop that you would if you were just having kind of normal NPC, dialogue written for a character. So it's supposed to be more dynamic. It's supposed to react to you. You're supposed to be able to talk to it and give you and kind of move around the space and do what you're asking it to do, or at least, feel like more of a human conversation. And the technology is really cool. Like, I think for what those characters bring to a story and to various kinds of games, sometimes that language and that dialogue can be really rote. Sometimes it's a thing you kind of skip past because it doesn't have that dynamic feel to it. It doesn't feel like you're really talking to another person. And they're trying to bridge that gap with the technology that they're using now. So, AI in the space has a lot of different conversations that go along with it. Some are really reasonable, and some are a little bit worried, maybe a little bit too much than I would say. But I think Convey is doing something really interesting in the space to bridge that gap, to give those players something new to look at.
What do you think are the main points of the ethics behind using AI in games? Where do you stand on that personally?
Yeah, I mean, I come down in a couple of different lanes with it. I totally understand the trepidation that a lot of game developers and a lot of folks in the industry have because of the idea that AI and technology like this could potentially supplant their jobs or take over some of the work that they would do in their daily work. And there's a reasonable layer to that conversation. I think any new technology winds up getting some scrutiny in a ways that we need to do to make sure that there's some ethical layers that we've seen in the generative art space, where folks are using large language models and other models to be able to take other people's work. We've seen so many people discuss this conversation in good ways. For me, I really think it can be additive in some places. I think it can be a deterrent for some. I think it really, we haven't figured out yet what the actual good use cases are. We're kind of in that NFT space right now in terms of AI in games, where people are like, what is this? Why are we using this? Does this feel good? But for me, having had conversations with folks over a couple of years around this, there are ways to use technology and AI in the game space and development that I think potentially could be useful for folks. So I'm not 100% against it. But I'm still waiting for the kind of jury to be out on where the ethical lines lay.
How would you feel about having an NPC be an AI completely, where you're just having a full-on conversation with not a voice actor, not someone who crafted, conversation loops or anything like that, just straight up AI? How would you feel about that?
It would be okay. I think it
Yeah.
would be fine. Actually, the conversation that I had with the head of Convey, he actually really talked about this really well on the most recent episode of Spawn on Me, where we discussed the fact that this would be a collaborative effort. So instead of this just being you dumping, Chat GPT into the mix and saying, go make me an NPC, those characters that would be fulfilling those worlds would be driven by the same narrative directors, the same writers that would be there, giving them lore, giving them backstory, giving them all of that kind of meaty work that goes along with building those characters. And then the AI does the work of reacting to the circumstances and situations that the player then gives to them. So instead of it taking away a job, it winds up giving more jobs to folks to be able to think about writing in a deeper way, to be able to hone their craft in another way as well. So when that came into the conversation, I was like, oh, this makes more sense in terms of the grand scheme of what we're trying to think about from a technology standpoint, and builds upon some of the work that is already being done by some of the most brilliant folks in the gaming industry. So I think once you think about it additively, then it changes the perspective a lot.
I'm also thinking about voice actors and performance and, conveying an emotion in a performance. I'm curious about if NPCs can bring as much depth and nuance to a performance as a person, a human.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the mystery that we see going forward in the next couple of years, right? Where voice actors have always been kind of not paid well. They've not been credited well. They've not gotten royalties not getting royalties in a lot of different ways. So that gives me some trepidation there to see if that changes. And we've seen through the SAG strike and a whole bunch of other stuff that those things haven't necessarily connected in ways that we had hoped that they would. So my want is that, again, there's some collaborative effort there. Because you really can't reenact a human performance as well as a human can yet. The technology just hasn't gotten there yet, but we're getting close. And that part is both scary and also kind of interesting to see where we're moving. So
we're going to have to just, again, watch it unfold and definitely keep having conversations about it to move it along in a direction that we feel comfortable with, as a species. So there's an article that came out this week. Ex-president of Blizzard talked about potentially he would like to see, if somebody really likes a game, they're playing the game, and at the end they're like, this was just such an amazing experience. He would like to see a way for these players, these gamers, to be able to tip the developer following that. A lot of people got into huge debates about this. What are your thoughts? What were your initial thoughts when you heard that this was said out loud and what it means? If, I hope it's not something we're actually entertaining, in my personal opinion, but what are your thoughts?
Just pay developers what they're worth. We don't have to tip developers. We don't need to have developers dance on the digital pole for their work. They already are doing fantastic jobs and making some of the best experiences that we've ever had. Just make sure that the industry that holds them up is sustainable and that you pay them what they're worth. And then you don't have to worry about the tipping phase of any of these conversations. What I would love to see is that players who really do care about the work and did have a good time really talk about those things in the ways that mean a bunch. We've seen, the ways you can make that actually kind of felt from a developer's perspective is if you tell people how much you love the work that they did, like buy a copy for a friend. There's so many other ways to do that work alongside or besides tipping them, because where does that money go? Where's the virtual tip jar? How do you divvy that up across the kinds of work that happen
in making a game
in those spaces? Does the main does the creative director just get most of the tip? Does the QA guy just get like a half of it? Like, how do you do that in a reasonable way? And I just don't think that makes a lot of sense logistically or from a hearts, minds, and feelings perspective. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
I agree with you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kahlief. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Kahlief Adams is the host and founder of the Spawn on Me podcast. You can follow him at Kahlief Adams on Twitter. Now, before I leave you, let's go over the video games releasing this week. After being stranded on consoles for a year, Dead Island 2 finally sets foot on dry land when it drops on PC April 22nd. We have a few more games coming out April 23rd, starting with the JRPG and spiritual successor to the Suikoden series. Aiden Chronicles 100 Heroes is coming to all platforms and gets a day one release on Game Pass. Tales of Kenzero Zao makes its debut on Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PC, Switch, PS5, and PS Plus Extra subscribers can play this one day one. The arcade title from 2017 TMNT Arcade Wrath of the Mutants crawls out of the sewers and onto all platforms. Then on Thursday, April 25th, the latest addition to the Saga franchise, Saga Emerald Beyond, releases on Switch, PS4, PS5, PC, and mobile for iOS and Android devices. Sandland, based on the manga created by the late Akira Toriyama, releases on PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Another Crab's Treasure some have been calling Sheldon Ring releases on Switch, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and receives the day one treatment on Game Pass. Rounding out this wild week of releases, we have 4 more titles all releasing on Friday, April 26th. After a 13-year hiatus, Topspin 2K25 returns to the court on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Manor Lords, the medieval civilization manager and real-time tactics game, releases on PC and gets a day one release on Game Pass. The Mario Party clone based on the popular anime Demon Slayer Sweep the Board, releases exclusively on Switch. And last but certainly not least, the highly anticipated action RPG Stellar Blade releases exclusively on PS5. Moving on to our free titles to look out for this week, we're starting with Nintendo. Nintendo typically isn't one to give out freebies, but earlier this week they announced that Nintendo Switch Online members can play NBA 2K24 free for a limited time starting April 27th and ending on April 23rd. For those interested and who haven't done so already, be sure to check this one out before it's too late. The Epic Games Store has more free games this week. The Big Con and Town of Salem 2 are free to download from April 18th to April 24th. Amazon has more free games listeners can pick up. Living Legends Fallen Sky, Vlad Circus Descent into Madness, and Tiny Robots Recharged can all be downloaded on Thursday, April 25th through the Amazon Games app. And that's This Week in Gaming. I'm your host, Naomi Kyle, and I just had the most awesome time bringing you all the latest in games. Thank you so much for listening. Your listen makes a huge, massive difference. Don't forget to let me know what you're playing and what you think of these stories by tagging me at Naomi Kyle on social. From all of us here at This Week in Gaming, we wish you a fun-filled week, and we'll see you again next week. Talk to you soon.
This Week in Gaming is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the iHeartRadio app for more podcasts just like these.